You've been lied to about strength. They told you strong people fight back. They told you power comes from winning arguments, from proving yourself right, from making sure everyone knows you won't be pushed around. But watch the people who actually hold power. They don't react. You insult them, they barely blink. You try to provoke them, they give you nothing. You wait for the explosion, the defense, the counterattack. It never comes. And somehow, that silence makes you feel smaller than any words ever could. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who refuses to react. It breaks the entire social contract we've been operating under since childhood. Someone pushes, you push back. Someone raises their voice, you raise yours. Someone disrespects you, you defend yourself. That's the game. But what happens when someone simply opts out? When they look at your provocation the way you'd look at a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store? Not angry, not offended, just observing. That person suddenly holds something you don't. They hold the frame. Frame control is not a term most people understand, but you live inside its effects every single day. The frame is the lens through which a situation is interpreted. It's who gets to define what just happened, what it means, and what comes next. In every interaction, there's a silent negotiation happening beneath the words. Whose version of reality will dominate this moment? Whose emotional state will set the temperature of the room? Most people don't even know this negotiation exists. They just feel it. They feel themselves getting pulled into someone else's anger, matching someone else's energy, defending against someone else's frame of what they are. And once you're reacting, you've already lost. Because reaction is subordination. When you react emotionally to what someone says or does, you're letting them write your internal script. They press a button, you perform. They say something cutting, you feel compelled to cut back. They act hurt, you feel compelled to apologize or justify. Your emotional state is now in their hands. This is why the person who reacts less has more power. Not because they're cold or unfeeling, but because they haven't handed over the remote control to their inner world. Think about the last argument you had. Really think about it. At what point did you lose composure? At what point did you say something you regret, or feel something you didn't want to feel? It was probably the moment you stopped responding and started reacting. Responding is conscious. Reacting is automatic. A response comes from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that thinks, plans, chooses. A reaction comes from your amygdala, the ancient part of your brain that just wants to fight, flee, or freeze. When someone triggers you into a reaction, they've essentially hacked your nervous system. They've bypassed your conscious mind and gone straight to your wiring. And here's what most people don't realize. The person who triggered you, they're not more powerful than you. They're just willing to be more chaotic. They're willing to throw a grenade into the room and see what happens. But chaos is not power. Real power is standing in the middle of someone else's chaos and not flinching. There's a reason hostage negotiators are trained not to react, not to match the intensity of the person on the other end. When someone is screaming, when someone is threatening, the trained response is to lower your voice, slow down, stay calm. Because the moment you react, you've entered their reality. And in their reality, they're in control. This applies to your daily life more than you think. That coworker who makes passive-aggressive comments, that family member who knows exactly what buttons to push, that friend who always needs to prove they're smarter, funnier, more successful than you. They're all running the same program. They're all trying to get a reaction, and every time you give them one, you're confirming something for them. You're confirming that they can affect you, that they matter enough to disrupt your peace, that they have access to your inner world. You're giving them rent-free space in your head. Now, this doesn't mean you become emotionless. It doesn't mean you stop caring or turn into some robotic version of yourself. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the difference between feeling something and being ruled by it. You can notice anger without becoming anger. You can recognize an insult without needing to retaliate. You can feel disrespected without needing to immediately correct the situation. This is emotional sovereignty. And it's terrifying to people who are used to controlling others through emotional manipulation. because their whole strategy depends on your reaction. When you don't give it to them, they have nothing. They're standing there with their hand raised to push a button that no longer does anything. And that's when you see them scramble. They'll push harder, say something more extreme, try to find the thing that finally makes you break. This is called an extinction burst. It's a term from behavioral psychology. When a behavior that used to get a reward suddenly stops working, the person doesn't just give up. They escalate. They try harder, louder, more desperately. A child who used to get candy by throwing a tantrum will throw an even bigger tantrum when it stops working. An adult who used to control you through anger will get even angrier when you stop reacting. They're testing to see if the old rules still apply. And this is where most people break. They see the escalation and think, okay, this is too much. I have to respond now. They see someone getting more upset and they feel guilty. They feel like they're being cruel by staying calm. But you're not being cruel. You're refusing to participate in a game where the only winning move is not to play. There's a concept in game theory called a non-zero-sum game. It means both people can win or both people can lose. Most of life is non-zero-sum. Most interactions don't require a winner and a loser. But some people turn everything into a zero-sum game. They need to win, which means you have to lose. And the way they win is by making you react, making you feel small, making you doubt yourself, making you angry or defensive or scared. When you refuse to play, you're not just protecting yourself. You're exposing the game itself. You're making it visible. And once it's visible, it loses its power. Here's what happens when you stop reacting. People start projecting onto your silence. They start filling it with their own fears and insecurities. Your calm becomes a mirror, and they don't like what they see. Someone insults you. You say nothing. What are they left with? Their own words hanging in the air, sounding more petty with each passing second of your silence. Someone tries to provoke you. You just look at them. What do they see? Themselves, trying too hard, needing something from you that you're not giving. Your non-reaction becomes the loudest thing in the room. This is why powerful people often speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that silence has weight. That absence of reaction creates presence. Think about the people you respect most, not the people you fear, not the people who are loudest or most aggressive, the people you genuinely respect. Chances are, they're not reactive. They listen more than they speak. When they do speak, it's measured. They don't need to prove anything. They don't need your validation. They're not performing for an audience, even an audience of one. They're just there, solid, unmoved. That solidity is what we're talking about. Now let's be clear about what this is not. This is not suppression. Suppression is pushing down your emotions, pretending they don't exist, smiling while you're screaming inside. That's not strength. That's a pressure cooker. And eventually, it explodes. What we're talking about is space. Space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote about this. He said between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. Most people have no space. Something happens, they react. Instantly, automatically. No gap, no pause, no choice. They're like a button that makes a sound when you press it. Predictable, controllable. The less you react, the more space you have. And the more space you have, the more you actually get to choose who you are. Because here's the thing about reactions. They're not really you. They're old programming. They're conditioning from childhood, patterns you picked up from your parents, your culture, your past experiences. When you react, you're not being authentic. You're being automatic. Real authenticity is responding from your actual values, not from your triggered nervous system. And this is where it gets interesting. When you stop reacting, you start noticing things. You notice patterns you've been running your whole life. You notice how certain people always seem to make you feel a certain way. You notice the specific words or situations that bypass your conscious mind and go straight to your defenses. You start seeing your own programming. And once you see it, you can change it. But you can't change what you can't see. And you can't see it when you're in the middle of reacting to it. This is why meditation, therapy, Journaling, any practice that creates space, is so powerful. Not because it makes you calm, but because it makes you conscious. It turns reactions into responses, automatic into chosen. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Someone at work takes credit for your idea. The old you would react immediately. Feel that hot flash of anger, maybe confront them right there, maybe stew in resentment for days. The new you pause. You feel the anger, sure, but you don't become it. You observe it. You notice the thought, this is unfair. I need to correct this right now. And then you ask yourself, is that true? Do I need to correct this right now? What actually serves me here? Maybe you do address it, but later, when you're calm, when you've chosen your words carefully, when you can speak from a place of strength, not reaction. Or maybe you realize it doesn't actually matter. Maybe you let them have the credit because you know your work speaks for itself, and you don't need external validation to know your worth. Either way, you chose. You didn't just react. Or let's say someone insults you on social media. The old pattern would be to craft the perfect comeback, to screenshot their hypocrisy, to get your friends involved, to make them pay for what they said. But what if you just didn't? What if you read it, felt the sting, and then closed the app? What if you realized that someone you don't know, who doesn't know you, said something mean on the internet, and that doesn't actually change anything about your life? The insult only has power if you empower it, and you empower it by reacting. Here's what's wild about this. When you stop reacting, you start to see how much of your life was built around reactions. How many of your relationships were just mutual triggering? How many of your decisions were made to prove something to someone else? How much of your identity was just a defensive structure? And when you stop defending, the structure doesn't collapse. It just becomes irrelevant. You start to discover who you actually are underneath all the reactions. This is where real confidence comes from. Not from winning, not from being undefeatable, but from being unshakable. Someone who can be defeated but chooses not to fight every battle is more powerful than someone who fights every battle and wins. Because the person who fights every battle is enslaved to every provocation. The person who chooses their battles is free. Now, some people will interpret this as weakness. They'll see your non-reaction and think you're scared. Think you don't have a backbone. Think they can walk all over you. Let them think that. Their misunderstanding of your strength is not your problem. And here's what usually happens. They push. You don't react. They push harder. You still don't react. Eventually, they either escalate to the point where they expose themselves as unreasonable, or they get bored and move on. Either way, you didn't have to do anything. You just had to not participate in their game. This is the paradox of non-reaction. It feels like passivity, but it's actually the most active thing you can do. It takes tremendous strength to not react. It takes awareness, self-control, emotional maturity. Any animal can react. Only a conscious being can choose not to. And people feel that difference, even if they can't articulate it. They feel that you're operating from a different level, that you're not in the game they're trying to play, that their usual tactics don't work on you, and that's deeply unsettling to people who are used to controlling others through emotional manipulation. So they'll test you. They'll say things like, "Why are you so calm? Are you even listening? Do you even care?" They'll try to frame your non-reaction as a problem, as coldness, as arrogance, as not caring. But you're not cold. You're just not hot. You're not arrogant. You're just not insecure. You're not uncaring. You're just not controlled. There's a difference. And you don't need to explain that difference. Explanations are often just reactions in disguise, justifications, defenses. If someone misunderstands your strength, that's their journey. You're not here to convince anyone of anything. You're just here to be sovereign over your own inner world. Let me tell you what changes when you live like this. You stop being tired all the time, because reacting is exhausting, defending yourself is exhausting, caring what everyone thinks is exhausting. When you stop doing those things, you suddenly have energy for what actually matters. Your relationships change too. The people who were only there for the drama fall away. The people who needed you to be small so they could feel big lose interest. The ones who were feeding off your reactions find someone else to feed off of. And what's left? Real connections. People who appreciate your calm. People who don't need anything from you except your presence. People who respect the fact that you don't play games. Your work improves. Your creativity improves. Your decision-making improves. Because you're not operating from a reactive state anymore. You're not making choices to soothe your ego or prove something or avoid feeling bad. You're making choices from clarity. And clarity is rare. Most people are walking around in a fog of reactivity, bouncing from one emotional state to another, never quite sure why they do what they do. You're not most people anymore. You're someone who learned that the less you react, the more power you gain. Not power over others, power over yourself. And that's the only power worth having, because you can't control what people say about you. You can't control what they think of you. You can't control whether they respect you or like you or understand you. But you can control whether they control you, and they control you the moment you react. So what do you do instead? You breathe, you pause, you observe your own mind, you notice the urge to defend, to explain, to prove, to attack. You notice it like you'd notice a cloud passing by, and then you choose. Maybe you respond, maybe you don't. Maybe you walk away, maybe you stay. Maybe you speak. Maybe you stay silent. But it's your choice, not a reaction. A choice, that's the difference. That's the power. And once you taste that power, you won't want to go back. Because you'll realize that most of what you thought was strength was just reactivity. Most of what you thought was standing up for yourself was just being controlled by others. Real strength is quiet. Real power is still. The less you react, the more you realize how little most things matter. How much energy you wasted on nonsense. How many battles you fought that didn't need to be fought. And you start to build a different kind of life. A life where you're not constantly on guard. Where you're not constantly defending. Where you're not constantly proving. A life where you just are. And that presence, that stillness, that refusal to be moved by every wind that blows is more powerful than any argument you could win. Because you're not trying to win anymore. You already won. You won the moment you stopped playing. So let them talk. Let them provoke. Let them try to get a rise out of you. You'll be somewhere else. Not above them. Not better than them. Just free from them. And freedom is the only victory that actually matters. The less you react, the more power you gain. Not over others, over yourself. And that's everything.